So we're going to talk about getting started on your weight loss journey, what you need to know, what are some things you can do at home right away to make a difference. The important thing to mention is, you have to have an honest conversation with yourself, I think, and uh, where I'm getting at with this is you have to figure out what things you think in your life are contributing to your current state of health. And in many ways, this is what we as trained specialists do. You have to figure out for yourself what things may be contributing to your weight. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. And sometimes it takes a while to sort of reflect on things that contribute. We certainly know there are other things that can contribute outside of just your biology, and we acknowledge that. And there's a whole host of lists, and sometimes it's helpful to go over these with someone who can specialize and tease out these different things. But we know that your mood and your mental health play a significant role in your ability to regulate your weight, and so that's something that has to be addressed. The weight journey often is a reflection of the totality of your health, and it's a reflection of this sort of holistic approach. That if any one thing is not right, I often tell my patients, if you have a chink in your foundation or a crack in your foundation, whatever analogy you want to use, then it's compromised, and the whole person is compromised, and that often is enough to really make it difficult to lose weight. If someone can give you feedback on what are those things that maybe contributing in a non-judgmental way, then that can be helpful. If they're just going to criticize you, which family can often do and not be helpful, then you probably have some insight into that. Then maybe don't ask them. So that's one thing. It's figuring out what are those things that contribute. Is there some aspect of your relationship with food that's impacting you? Do you have it, like a food addiction? Is it you are an emotional stress eater? Are you depressed? Do you have anxiety? Um, are you just eating the wrong things? Um, are you not being active enough? Are you not sleeping enough? Are you not managing your stress? So all of those things contribute in meaningful ways. And then there's the biological aspects that you may not have insight into. And that at that point, those things are a little bit out of your hand and that really need to be assessed by an expert. So I think after you've done an assessment on what can be contributing, you start working to address those things. Getting an assessment is important because this is what happens, and I see it so often, is people jump in, right? You guys have all done this. You've been super enthusiastic. You've been motivated. It's the beginning of the year. Something happened in your life. Sometimes you've had a health scare, and it's a wake-up call, and a doctor's like, you gotta lose weight or you're gonna kill yourself, right? This very, very dramatic, sensationalized language, and then you're like, oh gosh, I have to do something. And so you're super motivated. And the problem that we all make is we jump headfirst in, feeling super motivated. I'm going to do whatever diet. I'm going to go to the gym every day of the week, and we have no appreciation for what all is contributing to your current situation. And so you have to unpack this from the get-go, because if you're not addressing any of these issues that contribute, right, that make up and comprise the foundation, then you're not going to be addressing the root causes. And so that has to be a focus. So for any of you guys who are wondering, the only advice you've ever gotten is to change the way you eat and move more, it's not very helpful. It's not very helpful because there's so much more that goes into it. It's much more complicated than that. Okay, so that's where I would start, is I think look at yourself, develop an assessment of things. Sometimes it's helpful to write it out, talk to other people about that, get some insight outside of your own head, and figure out, okay, what is going on? The next step. So I really like to talk about kind of the 4 pillars of health. You kind of have to master all of these things eventually to have really significant weight loss, but you don't have to do much. And I think this is the next most important point. After you have a sense about what all is contributing, it's about starting real change. And I think everyone comes from this mentality because of how weight loss has been glamorized in the media and in movies, with people losing hundreds of pounds. And it's like they get put up on this pedestal, like it's this incredible experience that everyone should try to obtain and like transform their health. And the reality is, radical change, transformation doesn't stem from these 180-degree changes. Like that's one in a million, but the vast majority of cases, and we have this very well documented through something called the National Weight Control Registry. The vast majority of cases of people losing significant amount of weight and keeping it off come from small but meaningful change. And I would just bring this to light for you. If you're like, okay, small change, whatever, I want to lose 100 pounds. What does small change can do? If you can't master the small stuff that requires you to be consistent day in and day out, there is no hope for you to lose 200 pounds. There is no hope for you to lose 50 pounds. You have to be willing, you have to be humble to be able and to work on the small things. The small things may be going from drinking soda to drinking diet soda. The small things may be adding an extra serving of vegetables with your meals. The small thing may be going on a 10-minute walk every day. You have to be willing to do the small things. And only then, when you can master the small things and start to build a foundation for yourself, will you start to head towards meaningful change. And so focus on the small stuff first. Meaningful change comes from being consistent about a number of small things. It's those small victories that add up. It is not changing your life and the way you eat completely, being a person that is not you, and then having to reconcile with that person a month from now when you're like, what am I doing? Who am I right now? This is not me, right? It's about developing significance in your life through small, consistent, but meaningful change. And so when I talk to people about, okay, so how do we work on these different pillars, whether it's nutrition, whether it's, getting you more, increasing your physical activity and your movement, whether it's your stress management, whether it's working on your mental, emotional well-being, your sleep, etc. We talk about doing three things. Setting goals for yourself that are specific, meaning you can define them for yourself. We talk about that are meaningful goals, suggesting that, like, listen, if it's not going to move the needle at all, it's not something you really should be doing. I want it to move the needle. I want you to be enacting real change. And it needs to be something that is measurable. Like, if you sit here and tell me, and this happens all the time, patients are, okay, Dr. Albert, I want to do more of this. And I'll be like, how are you going to hold yourself accountable to more of this 2 weeks from now? More of this sounds like a nice idea, but more of this is incredibly vague. It's really hard to hold yourself accountable to more of this or less of that. And so I want something that is measurable, that we can reflect back on and say, okay, I did that, or no, I didn't. I still need to work at mastering the small things. And the last bit has to be reasonable. And I can't emphasize this enough. I literally shout at my patients, not really, but you have to be willing to do things that you know you can do. If I'm asking you to go do something like completely cut out carbohydrates, when you understand that that will bring significant suffering in your life because you enjoy having carbohydrates, it may be that you just have to change the type of carbohydrates you eat. Well, then that's not a reasonable change for you to do. If you're not going to be able to do it a month from now, a year from now, there's no longevity to that approach. So why the hell would you ever do that? It's a terrible idea. It's terrible advice. That person's giving you horrible advice. So these goals, these changes, the mastery of the small things have to be meaningful, they have to be reasonable, and they have to be measurable. Yeah, you don't have to completely get rid of bread. If someone's telling you you have to completely get rid of one food, I would be concerned, right? And so you have to understand that. Now, I want to caveat this because this is where I got back to what are the things that are contributing, right? That was the first step we talked about, having a really honest conversation with yourself, doing a deep assessment of what are these things that are contributing. If you know something like bread is, for instance, not something that you can cut back on in a reasonable manner or make a change, go from white bread, which is much more sugar laden, to something like multigrain bread, which has a lot more fiber, it's a lot healthier, it has more intact elements of the actual wheat, then maybe getting rid of bread is something you have to do. If you know that behavior that you're involved in is incredibly problematic, like you lose control, you lose all sense of control when you're eating certain things, it could be chocolate, it could be whatever, then you might have to assess whether or not that's something you can even cut down on because you know it's a slippery slope. And so if it's a slippery slope, then that is something you have to have an honest conversation with yourself about. So that is the caveat I would say when people tell you, "Oh, you gotta completely get rid of something." Not really, but if it is something where you can't cut down or you can't come up with an alternative that still allows you to enjoy it, you might. Okay? So that is the context by which you should think about that. All right. So we talked about mastering the small things. The next part of that is understanding, okay, maybe I want to make some real change in my life, but I don't know how to do it. Maybe it's like I got to get up 5 days a week and go on a walk. Maybe it's I'm going to do some resistance training. Maybe it's I'm going to add this new food to or cut down on this food, or I'm going to go to bed earlier and have a consistent bedtime, some type of goal for myself. I don't know how to do that. Well, there's some really, really cool behavioral science that you can leverage that allows you to start building new habits. There's something called habit coupling. I really love the book Atomic Habits if you've never read it before. It has some tremendous insights into sort of the human mind and human psychology. But this one concept in particular really resonated with me. It's something I've done intuitively and never really sort of appreciated until I read it in the book. And it's the idea of habit coupling. So you take something that is otherwise a very negative stimulus, negative habit, there's tremendous inertia associated with it, and you pair that with something that you enjoy or something that is much more reasonable for you to do on a consistent basis. So for me, it's like sometimes I absolutely dread working out. Like I can't like trying to get my workout clothes on, go to the gym, go to my garage. I actually have that's where I work out now because of the pandemic. I mean, it's hard for me. Like I'd much rather do other things, and I feel that inertia. Well, what you do instead is that you pair it with something that you know is a positive reward. And what it does, it tricks your mind so that you don't associate that negative experience with that one behavior. In fact, your brain can only process the positive. And so it plays out like this. For me, I will drink coffee prior to going to work out. And so I'm coupling this really positive experience because I really love coffee. It gives me a lot of endorphins, a lot of serotonin. It's a really positive thing. And then immediately after, I'll go work out and I get an energy boost. I feel better about the experience. I don't feel as overwhelmed in trying to work out. And in doing those things and coupling those together, you reinforce and you condition yourself to do what is otherwise a negative behavior. And so that is a way to trick your brain. It's called habit coupling, and it's very effective. I've used it. You can pair it with things that are not as positive per se, and it's like leaving your clothes out. If you leave your clothes out in the morning, the first thing when you get up and you're going to work out in the morning, you lay them out, you're much more likely to then put them on because it's kind of a chore to put them back away. You're like, "Oh, at that point I kind of have to do it." And so you find these ways to couple different activities together, different behaviors together that allow you to start conditioning your own self in doing them. And then over time, it gets easier, right? With any behavior, you can condition it into the positive. So, habit coupling can be really helpful as it relates to making meaningful changes on these goals that you set for yourself. Um, Two things that I want to highlight that I think are often neglected are sleep and your well being. So, everyone likes to focus on the physical, right? Like the physical health, the physical well being. These are like working on your nutrition, exercising. But what's often neglected is these other aspects of the totality of your well being and health. And that's sleep. Sleep is critically important. We know that people that get inadequate sleep, right? And the research describes that people that consistently get less than 7 hours, or actually who sleep too much, get more than 8 or 9 hours of sleep regularly, have inadequate sleep, and that they're sleeping too little or too much. And what they're not able to do is they're not able to sort of cycle their biology appropriately and get enough of these deep cycles. And the consequence of that is you get changes and alterations of your hormones. You get excess cortisol production, which causes a whole host of downstream metabolic issues. It can affect your mood. We know it affects your immune function. It can affect your cardiovascular health. The net effect of this as it relates to weight is that it makes it more difficult to lose weight in people that get less sleep, get inadequate sleep. We know this from shift workers as well, is that they gain more weight. And so if you're not working on your sleep, finding a consistent time when you can go to bed, if you're not prioritizing sleep, and sleep is taking a back seat to everything else, then you're going to really struggle. absolutely going to struggle. And so you have to prioritize sleep. Sleep cannot be neglected. And you may surprise yourself when you consistently fall asleep at the same time and you're consistently getting adequate sleep and feeling more restful. You may not struggle as much the next day. You may be feeling more up to making better choices with your diet. You may actually have the ability to then go and work out and having a meaningful movement episode. So, and that's actually pretty consistent. We know that's the case. And so oftentimes in society and in healthcare, we neglect sleep and we don't focus on sleep enough, but sleep is more and more, we're finding, critically important to our overall health. Well-being. So I talk to people about this all the time. The majority of my patients are women, because women actually go to the doctor and they listen to doctors. Men don't. They typically try to they do whatever they want or they neglect their health. But well-being is super critical. Like in many ways is the most critical component. And what I mean by well-being is I'm talking about your mental and emotional well-being. And if this isn't something that you're prioritizing as well, right, as one of these four pillars that I'm talking about, I mean, good luck trying to lose weight. If you are really struggling mentally, if you are grieving or you're not being able to manage your stress and it's sort of growing within you, we know it manifests in many unhealthy ways. We know it has a dramatic impact on your ability to focus, on your ability to be consistent, on your ability to maximize all of these other opportunities within these other pillars. You're not going to be there for yourself. You're not going to be there for your family. And I think what's hard is we often put other people before ourselves, right? And that can affect us inevitably because we neglect our own health and we neglect our own well-being. And what I tell people is you have to non-negotiable make time for yourself. This isn't time for you to then go do some more catch-up work, whether it's for your job, whether it's for your family. This is time where you get to fully decompress. You get to do something that's not going to add a burden to you. For some people, it may be reading a book. For some people, it may be having a session of mindfulness and meditation, nature walk, window shopping, going and doing some physical activity. It could be anything. It has to be meaningful to you, but really allows you to decompress and sort of manage and reflect on your day in a way that is going to be significant. Because if you don't do that, if you allow these daily stressors, if you allow this emotional grievance to build within you, what inevitably happens is it does get the best of you. You do get overwhelmed, and it does, in its own way, project in various aspects of your life that are not beneficial to you and for the other people that you interact with. And so you absolutely have to focus on your mental and emotional well-being. So I talk to people, make it a priority, make sleep a priority. If you don't do those two things, good luck trying to lose weight. A few things I will say about nutrition is we know that the most important considerations around nutrition, more important than a specialized diet for your type of health issues, more important than your macronutrient ratio, more important than all of that stuff, the special diet you're on, is eating foods that are minimally processed, that are whole foods. That is by far and away. That's the one thing that we have a 100% certainty on is eating whole foods. And what I mean by whole foods, if you're like, I don't know what that means, that sounds super vague. Well, if you think about the westernized diet, which is the American diet in many ways, where we get 50% of our calories or more in a day, come from these ultra processed foods. These are foods that typically are packaged with fat and sugar in them. They have both fat and sugar. They have both of them together. They're made to have long shelf lives. They're made to be cheap. They're made to be readily consumed. They're almost always in every convenience store, in every market, in every restaurant across the country. And these foods, they typically have a high number of calories per the volume of food. So they're very high in calories. They often are very low in actual nutrients. And because of that, because that ratio is completely off, right? Ideally, if you want to lose weight, you want food that has high number of nutrients and very little calories. That ratio being flipped is why your body doesn't get satisfied when you eat these foods. It's why you can eat a million bags of chips. It's why you can have 3, 4 bagels with cream cheese. It's why you can eat cookies and then have a whole dinner and do it's all those foods that have that combination of sugar and fat in them are the ones that are so problematic. And we actually consume the vast majority of our calories in a day come from. Now they can be more subtle, and this is what trips people up. You might think, okay, well, I'm doing good things. I'm having my instant oatmeal, processed food. I'm having my Kind Bar, processed food. I'm having my, they come in packages. They have preservatives. They're not coming from, we want to keep the food particle, the food stuff that was taken from the ground, and we want to keep it as intact as possible. The more processing that goes into it, the more that the nutrients that were found in that food naturally are being stripped away, and the likelihood that they're being replaced with things like sugar and processed fats is much, much higher. And that stuff has no nutritional value. Sugar has really no nutritional value. When sugar is found naturally, like as it is in fruit, and it's paired with fiber and all of the phytonutrients and all the antioxidants that you find in fruit, then it's incredibly healthy. But when sugar is by itself, when it's added as cane sugar into food or high fructose corn syrup, that's when people are malnourished but overfed. And so we have to focus on eating things that are intact, minimally processed whole foods. This often requires you to cook. This often requires you to put some effort into making the food. These foods often perish within a week or 2 weeks because of their nature, their constituency. They don't have all these preservatives. That is the most important thing. I don't care about your macronutrient ratio, low carb, high carb. It doesn't matter. The data all shows the same thing. They all result in about the same weight loss at 1 year. The most important thing we found is, are you getting more of your calories from unprocessed foods, or are you getting more of your calories from processed foods, aka standard American diet, aka westernized diet, aka the diet that made us all fat? Okay, so that's the most important nutrition principle. You can debate me about ketogenic diet and all these things, and sure, but at the end of the day, that is all trivial if you're not eating whole foods, if you're not eating unprocessed foods, if you're not focusing on the foods that we know have high nutrient value and relatively low calories. So your body will feel satisfied, you won't overeat, and at the end of the day, it will help promote further health gains and weight loss. So that's it on that point. Whole foods. Focus on whole foods. Would Beyond Meat be considered whole food? That's actually an interesting question. It's actually considered a processed food. And I think, the caveat to there are some processed foods that I would consider okay and better. And as you know, nothing is completely black and white, and there is gray, and there are gradients to this thing. And where would that come from? Where would that factor in here? One example of a processed food that I think is a reasonable thing to incorporate on a consistent basis: whey protein. So whey protein, mixing it into your shakes, mixing it into your drink as a supplement, as a healthy snack, or healthy as an additional source of protein, I think is a valid source. And actually, there's a lot of data to suggest that whey protein, despite it being heavily processed, has a lot of health benefits. Whey protein is one of these exceptions, I would say, right? So Beyond Meat and some of these sort of fake meat alternative plant-based foods, they're processed. Listen, they're not going to be as good as eating actual plants, and in some cases, not as good as eating the actual meat product. The benefit that we've seen, and this is, once again, we're getting into a lot of the nuance, and I like to keep things relatively simple. When you look at one food versus the other, you really can only compare them in a vacuum, right? You can't then go ahead, well, then how does that compare to salmon? Because the two things aren't alike, and they're very different. And I would prefer you eat salmon than both of them. But like, when you look at them head to head, is one relatively healthier than the other? It depends on what you're going for, and that's why it's difficult to say one way or another, absolute yes or absolute no. So I would just say, as a general rule, the more you can focus on these unprocessed foods, the better. And you can verify it. Look on the nutrition label. That's really important to become savvy in understanding the nutrition label and the facts around it. Does it say added sugar on it? I think I had like the same conversation 5 times last week with different patients. We were focusing on oatmeal. Oatmeal can be incredibly healthy. Steel cut oatmeal, probably the best oatmeal out there. But when you look at oatmeal, about 90% of the oatmeal products you will find in the market have added sugar. Oftentimes 10 to 15 grams, guys. That's a tremendous amount of sugar. That's a tremendous amount of calories that are providing no nutritional value, right? And so you have to look and say, oh my gosh, had no idea that Quaker Oats, like 90% of their oatmeals have sugar in it, have added sugar. I don't want added sugar. I want just the normal sugar that comes with the food, like the sugar that's found in corn and the sugar that's found in potatoes. That's the sugar that is native to the plant. I don't want the sugar that they take in and they scoop it in into their huge vat. Like that's terrible for you. We know it. It causes fat to develop around your abdomen and fat around your liver and causes heart problems. So we want to focus on foods that have natural sugars, not added sugars. Focus on foods that have healthy, ideally unsaturated fats. These are poly and monounsaturated fats. You're like, what is that? That's like avocado. These are like nuts and seeds and fish, to some extent meat, some seed oils. So extra virgin olive oil is my favorite. We want to focus on those. Eggs are fine. I don't have issue with eggs. Some people make a big deal. I don't. As long as you're not doing like 10 eggs a day, I think it's very reasonable to have a few eggs a day and as part of a healthy diet. So eggs are unprocessed, right? They're about as natural as it gets. So so I think that's my philosophy on nutrition. If you're not focusing on the whole foods, minimally processed foods, then you probably have a lot of room to go. And so it does sometimes require you to put some effort in preparation, learning how to cook, meal prep. If you don't want to cook, having meal delivery to you from some of these sources. There are a number of sources now that will make whole entrees for you and deliver them to your house. There are a lot of different ways you can go about it that are better than going out and eating at the restaurant, the fast food joint, the convenience store, etc. All right, that's my nutrition soapbox. I'll get down now. Yes, eggs are great. I have no problem with it. A lot of that's bogus science. The last bit was movement. Okay, movement is very simple. Movement is different based upon the individual. Everyone starts from a different level. And so you have to acknowledge that. And the biggest mistake I see people make when they try to move more is that they get overly enthusiastic and they come exploding out of the gate, and then they hurt themselves or they're too sore and they have to take a week off, or any number of things. What you want to do is start very slow, build yourself up. Doesn't matter what level you're at. Everyone goes at their own pace. And just get your body moving. Your body doesn't discriminate, I will tell you. Your body does not discriminate what type of movement you do, whether it's walking, whether it's running, whether it's lifting weights. It wants you to move. Our bodies were made to move. That's why we're bipedal, meaning we walk upright with 2 feet. We were made to move. That was part of our evolution. So your body wants you to move, and we know that just moving in any way can be meaningful. And most of the health benefits from moving come from the first 10 to 15 minutes of actual movement. 10 or 15 minutes. That's where the vast majority of health benefits come from. The rest of it is smaller. You get diminishing returns as you exercise more and more and more, right? So exercising in a meaningful way, 10 to 15 minutes a day, whether it's using your bands, whether it's doing just some body weight stuff in your chair, whether it's just going on a walk around your house, neighborhood, hike, swim, run, bike, whatever it is, just move. That's literally it. You just have to move. So if that takes out some of the burden from you that you have to do this so structured, I hope it does, because your body doesn't care. It doesn't care what type of exercise you do. As long as you can physically tolerate it, you go at a slow enough pace that allows it to adapt, right? You're not going to do an hour of working out when you've been on the couch for the last 2 months. You got to build up slow. Start with 5 minutes. Add a few minutes every week, right? Make it sustainable. Master the small, meaningful, measurable changes. You do that, you're building an approach that has legs, that has a foundation. So I think that's a lot for you guys to think about in the coming weeks. That's a lot. That movement hurts. It does hurt. It can hurt, especially if you're carrying a lot of extra weight. The good thing, though, is that we know if you have things like osteoarthritis of your knees, joints, hips, that actually movement helps, and that once you get through the hurt part, that it's actually helpful for you. and that it can reduce the inflammation around your joints if you have osteoarthritis just by moving. And so actually not moving is the worst thing you can do with osteoarthritis. I'm not talking about people that have injuries. Injuries are different. You don't want to push through the pain when you have an injury because pain can be a signal that there's something wrong that your body's trying to tell you. But if you have a chronic arthritic condition like osteoarthritis, then actually movement is the number one treatment. And that has been verified time and time again in the orthopedic surgery literature. So that's why we prescribe physical therapy. It's to get people to move in meaningful ways that sort of account for their limitations in their ability to move at that time. So that's all physical therapy is. It's literally just structured movement, trying to get the joints going again. Yeah, so that's where I would start, guys. Assessment, focus on the small but meaningful change, and then really try to address those four pillars. If you can be a master of small, meaningful change within those four pillars, sleep, well-being, movement, nutrition, you do all of that, man, you got a real chance, and that's scary. So